You're watching Tim Topham TV, the piano teaching podcast, episode number 60. G'day everyone from sunny Melbourne, where spring has sprung and the weather's starting to look actually nice, and you can tell summer is in the air. Sorry to those of you in the Northern Hemisphere where it's starting to get colder and wetter. You're watching Tim Topham TV and you're in the right place if you would like to improve your teaching, get some fresh ideas and really take your music teaching skills to the next level. In today's episode, I'm interviewing a clinical psychologist, Lydia Meem, who you'll meet shortly, and we're going to be unpacking autism from a psychologist's perspective. And this is the first time I've interviewed a psychologist for the podcast, and I'm so glad we were able to get Lydia on the program because it's great getting not just the music education experts' view, but also the view of the people who are diagnosing and treating and helping people who have these conditions. Now, before we start today's episode, I did want you to check out Noviscore. This is your last chance to grab a 30% off discount for any piano sheet music for your students during the month of September. 30% off any music that you download from Noviscore. And I've been getting some great reviews already from people who have been trying out Noviscore. They're pretty amazed that they hadn't heard of it before, which so was I when I first found out about it. If you're looking for a variety of arrangements at different levels, up to 4 different levels of difficulty for your students, and you're looking for sheet music that you can download, written and arranged by piano teachers and pianists, then Noviscore is a place to go for you. So they have, it's not just pop either, classical, there's blues, gospel, soundtracks, Christmas songs, great in time for Christmas coming up soon, and also piano solo and piano accompaniments too. So you can go on there, search for music, and then download, as I say, a version that suits your students' abilities. And this is the real advantage for Noviscore. So I do encourage you to check it out. You can view the music from any device. So it's not just an app or anything, on your computer, desktop, laptop, tablet, smartphone, anywhere at all. And you can print out that music from your computer or your laptop so that you can use it with your students in lessons. These guys have an amazing website. They've got a great catalog that's growing all the time. Please go and check them out. If you would like to get the code to get your 30% off, then head to today's show notes at timtopham.com/episode 60. Now, I'm also going to offer you a great download for today's episode. We're going to be hearing from Lydia about her autism spectrum disorder student profile sheet, and she's actually giving us a copy of her 2-page profile sheet. So this is a place where you can actually have a discussion with a student's parents about their communication skills, their social skills, their conversational skills, their comprehension, teamwork, coping with change, their sensitivity to sensory elements. And you can actually go through the checklist and work with the parent before you actually have the student in your classroom for the first time. So this is where you can instantly get just cued about, whether patterns or symmetry are going to affect your student, or whether smells or textures, shapes or colors or things to do with your behavior is going to affect the student. And you can actually get this information up front before you even meet the student. So this is a fantastic download. I'm so thankful to Lydia for sharing it so freely with us. If you'd like to grab a copy of that, you'll need to head to the show notes at timtopham.com/episode 60, and you'll find the download link there for you. My guest today, Lydia, I'm not going to go into too much detail because we're going to find out a bit more about her at the moment, but all you need to know is that she is a registered clinical psychologist working with students from preschool to year 12 in Australia who are having autism diagnoses. She's a member of the Australian Psychological Society's College of Clinical Psychologists and the Association of Psychologists in Developmental Disability Services. Lydia knows exactly what she's talking about. She's got some fantastic tips for us as music teachers and educators in general about how we can best serve our students who are autism spectrum disordered. If you'd like to grab the show notes and any links we talk about, that's at timtopham.com/episode 60. And finally, last chance reminder for those of you in Australia, you've been checking out on the Facebook some of the videos of the live events that I'm running with Paul Myatt at the moment. If you haven't got around to it and you're in Adelaide, Perth or Brisbane, your events are still coming up and you can find out more about them at the website timtopham.com/transform to find out about our Transform Your Teaching one-day workshops. All right, let's get into the interview today. Can't wait to meet Lydia Meem and introduce her to you. Here she is. Lydia, welcome to the show today.
Thank you.
It's so great. We're laughing because we've had so much trouble getting you on the call today. This is about our third attempt, it feels like. I'm really, really glad that you've been able to persevere and come on the show today because you've got a really interesting perspective, I think, for us. And just before we begin, I'm really interested to know, you're a clinical psychologist.
Yes.
What does that mean? How's that different to a psychologist?
Okay, so a clinical psychologist has done more training. So we do our standard 4 years and then we do another 2, often more years to do a master's as well.
Right.
So it's very practical.
Okay, and then psychiatry, that's another whole thing, right? Or does that normally build on from that?
That's completely different. So that's psychiatrists are doctors, so they do medicine first and then they do psychiatry.
Right.
Whereas psychologists, we do psychology, so we're behaviour people.
Got it.
Not doctors.
Okay, cool. All right.
Unless you do a PhD and then you're a doctor, but you're not a medical doctor.
Yes, got it.
Yeah.
All right. So look, can you give us some background about your experience and maybe a little bit about what your day looks like normally? What kind of things are you doing with students?
So I have a private practice in Newcastle and I see children mainly and then adolescents and adults and sometimes couples on the autism spectrum. So I specialise in autism and developmental disorders and I do lots of behaviour support stuff. So managing challenging behaviours and I do diagnosis as well. So I look at autism assessments, cognitive assessments, so IQ, developmental assessments, reading assessments, adaptive assessments, which is like everyday living skills, and ADHD and ODD, so hyperactivity, impulsivity, inattention, and behaviour difficulties.
You said ODD. Did you mean OCD or have I got that wrong?
No, ODD. ODD is oppositional defiant disorder.
Okay.
So you might have come across some quite stroppy kids. So they're the you're not the boss of me kind of kids.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, and that's a behavioural thing. So this is a mix of behaviour issues and also actual diagnoses of disorders, right?
Yeah. So when the behavioural stuff gets really out of control, then kids might make a diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder or conduct disorder.
Right. Okay. Yep. Got it.
Yeah. So that's an additional diagnosis. So some of the kids that I see have 4 or 5 labels.
Right.
When they come to see me. So they might have anxiety and autism and ADHD and a bit of ODD and sometimes they might have some OCD, so obsessive compulsive disorder.
Right.
They tend to come to me when there's lots going on.
Yeah. But, and I think it's great to talk with you because you're the person who is actually doing the diagnosis, I should say. And as a teacher, I've been in the situation where I've had a student with me and I haven't had any discussion. The parents haven't come to me and said, yes, so-and-so is ASD. You have to sort of think, what? I'm pretty sure there's something going on here. And you're the person that's actually saying, yes, there is something going on here. So It's great to go and actually get the information that we need right from the people who are doing the diagnosis. So thank you very much again for coming on.
Oh, no worries. And I guess for me, I'm often talking to parents about that it is okay to tell people like piano teachers that their child has autism and often parents are afraid to do that because they think that you're going to not want them as clients or that you're going to somehow treat them differently. And so I say to them, it's really important that they let you know so that then you can use the strategies so that they can have a really good time when they come and learn to play the piano. But it's not about excluding them.
And I mean, that connection that we have, we're very lucky one-on-one for potentially years of a student's life. It's just I'm glad you're saying that to the parents because we need to know. We can't do our work without knowing. Yeah.
No, you definitely need to know. Yeah. So there's definitely things you can do to make it easier. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we'll talk about some of those things in a moment. But I'm interested, this month the focus in the podcast has been on special needs teaching, which is a kind of general thing that encompasses a whole lot of areas. But it's been interesting. Most of the people I've spoken to have a real focus and experience with autism. And your business is all about autism.
Yeah.
Why is it that autism has so much focus at the moment?
Well, I think it's getting its time in the sun at the moment. So you might remember, back quite a while ago now, there was a stage where ADHD was in the spotlight and kids were getting diagnosed with ADHD all the time. And now I think it's shifted and people are becoming much more aware of autism and it's in the media all the time. And so that has good things and bad things. And not everyone who has been diagnosed with autism meets the diagnosis. So we need to do the autism assessment properly. Some people with autism have only seen a paediatrician for 10 minutes and then they've made a diagnosis.
Wow.
That's not the best way to diagnose autism.
So I can imagine.
The way that I do it, it takes 10 hours at least, including report writing time. So you need to go through a whole process.
People can get that diagnosis just from their Is that, you said paediatrician, so a doctor?
Yeah. So not usually the GPs.
Yeah.
GPs are smart enough to refer on, which is good.
But they'll either refer to a psychologist or a paediatrician.
Yeah, usually.
Yeah.
It varies depending on the states. So different states have different, like for the example, the school system in Western Australia, they want you to be seen by a paediatrician and a psychologist and a speech therapist to make a combined diagnosis.
Right.
Whereas in New South Wales, where I am, I can make the diagnosis on my own. But then if they want funding through a certain funding body, then I have to get a speech therapist to sign off. Whereas they'll accept a one-line letter from a paediatrician or a child psychiatrist saying this child has autism. They won't accept my 16 pages report without a speech therapist saying, yes, I agree. So it just depends on the situation.
People living in America, it's likely to be different again, potentially.
Yeah. So there's gold standard assessment tools that we need to be using, but not everyone uses them.
Right.
So, so there's been a push lately for us to get more standardised about how we assess for autism. And that would be a really good thing.
I was going to say that could only be a good thing, I would have thought.
Yeah, that would be a great thing. Yeah. And I think it's really important that we do it properly too, because there's a whole lot of grieving that goes on when parents are going through this process of getting their child assessed. And if we do it properly, then they can actually be part of that process and see why we're making the diagnosis. And often they have gotten used to their child's behaviours and so they might not see what we're seeing. And so I'm often explaining to parents, this is what I'm seeing. They're playing in the corner of the room. Have you noticed we're seeing a lot of the back of their head today? They're not looking at us. Then, they really like that toy, but they haven't shown it to us. They're not trying to get us to have a turn, that kind of stuff. And so that's, explaining why I'm making the diagnosis so that then it's not such a shock when I'm telling them.
And I imagine for some parents, they might not know that something is unusual if that's their first child.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. So often it's not until the younger child overtakes an older child that you get people going looking, or if their child's not talking. So often there are actually signs like when the baby's 12 months old, but parents don't know to look for those things. So often it's not until they're not talking. And if you have someone who's higher functioning, who has more language, then often they don't get picked up until they're in primary school.
Right. So I want to just talk a little bit more about this idea of assessments, because you've really kindly actually given us a 2-page assessment sheet. Now, you better explain this because we obviously don't want to think that we're assessing and diagnosing autism on a 2-page sheet. How would you see teachers being able to use this sheet?
Okay, so what it is, it's an ASD Student Profile, and it's really an information gathering tool. So I use it as part of my assessments because I send it to school along with another Asperger's questionnaire and get the teachers to fill it in for me. And then when I'm doing the diagnosing, I use the gold standard assessments. So one of them is the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, which is a play-based assessment that takes a good hour. Mm-hmm. And then there's also another developmental interview called the Autism Diagnostic Interview Revised, and that takes about 2.5 to 3 hours with the parents to go through all their developmental history and look for all the behaviours. So that's what I would call a diagnostic assessment. So the ASD Student Profile is not any of that.
No, right, okay.
It's just an information sharing tool. So the thing about a lot of the screening tools, so the other one that I use, the Australian Scale for Asperger's Syndrome, which you can find on the internet, that's put out by Tony Atwood, who's well known in autism. Those questionnaires will often have a behaviour, and then you have to say yes or no, or you might have a scale from 0 to 5 or something like that. And so if you're getting lots of 5s and 4s, then that tells you maybe it's time for an autism assessment. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't actually tell you the specific behaviours the child has. It just kind of says how they fit into these various boxes. So the ASD Student Profile is something I came up with to share the specific information. So my first thinking about it was for casual teachers coming into school, like if the kids' teacher's away, the casual teacher can quickly read this sheet and see what they need to know about the kid in their class, or the handover time from one year to the next, that kind of thing. But equally, it can be for you guys, it can be for scout leaders, basketball coaches, if they go on camp, all that kind of stuff. So it's about knowing how kids communicate, what kind of social skills difficulties they might have, what their interests are so that you can get rapport with them really quickly, and then what kind of behaviours you need to be aware of, sensory sensitivity, teaching strategies, that kind of stuff. So it's a really quick tick-a-box thing. But if you get the parents to fill it out, and if you have adolescents, they can actually fill it out themselves and give it to you, which is great.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, so that's why I've put it into I language. So it's talking about, things that, so it might be, I sometimes have trouble knowing how to start a conversation or something like that. So then they can tick that box themselves. So that can be really empowering for adolescents particularly.
Yeah. As soon as I was reading this sheet, and everyone listening and watching can download this, timtopham.com/episode 60. We've got the sheet there ready to download. And I thought, this is perfect for a parent that rings up and would like a first trial lesson and says, look, my student is on the autism spectrum. And one of us could just go, well, look, I've got this little 2-page assessment. Would you mind filling it out and sending it back to me so that I've got a place to start? I thought that was brilliant. So I really appreciate you sharing that. I think it's going to be a great help. Okay, so let's talk about some of these strategies. We've had a few other people on the podcast giving their view as piano teachers, but as a psychologist, what are some things that can help us in our music teaching when we're focusing on students with autism?
Okay, so the first thing is that kids with autism are visual learners. And so I imagine people have been talking about using visuals when you're teaching them. So I can show you a couple of things. Obviously, you would have your own visuals for teaching the music side. But in terms of the behaviour management stuff, you might want things like listening ears and hands still. So when you're trying to get kids to pay attention to what you're doing, then reminding them to listen with their ears and keep their hands still, look at you and look at your teacher's hands and keep their mouth quiet, those would be the things that you want when you're trying to show them something.
So is this are these these are card? Would you have these as cards?
Yeah, so I just made them this morning, like while I was getting ready for today.
Yeah.
So I just drew them, but you could have them. You could have them on a strip. Like often you might see ones where people have laminated them just so that they don't get wrecked, and you can put a bit of Velcro on the back of them so that then you can move them around and mix them up as much as you like.
And so for students sitting there and really fidgety with their hands, you're saying you
would tap the hand still, and so then you don't have to talk as much because a lot of kids with autism have trouble with auditory processing.
Mm-hmm.
So it would remind them to keep their hands still. And the other thing is then you're not rousing on them. So they're not arguing with you, they're arguing with the piece of paper.
Okay.
So it takes some of the angst out of it. And kids with autism aren't offended by this kind of stuff.
Great. So that's a really great strategy, yeah. That's something simple that anyone could try out right now, sort of thing. I really like that.
So this kind of idea, if you're more interested in that, there's a book called Whole Body Listening Larry, or you could get posters of Whole Body Listening Larry. So he listens with his whole body. So looking at the person who's talking, listening with their ears, keeping their mouth closed, their hands still, their feet still, thinking about what the person's saying and caring about what the person's saying. So that's the full version, but I was thinking those ones might be popular.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I should mention too, if you're watching this and you haven't had a look at Lydia's blog post from this week where I put together those comments that we had in our email conversation, I've actually put links to some of those things. I went and found them online. So if you're interested, check out that blog post. Just go to timtopham.com/blog and you'll find her post there.
Cool. Yeah. So another one, often kids with autism, they don't understand about taking turns. So you might have, like this one, I just drew it, but you can make it like if you grab a spinner from a board game, you can make it so that you've got a little arrow and you have the teacher's turn and the student's turn, so you can put your names on. Yep. And then again, like, when you want to have a go at the piano and show them something, then it's your turn. And then when you want them to have a go, then
you flip the arrow across. Yeah. So if you're listening to this, it's it's like the top half of a circle with a teacher on one side and a student on the other, and an arrow that you could flip between the two. So again, it's a visual way of saying who's doing what now.
Whose turn it is. Yeah, that's right.
That's great.
Because, kids might get confused about that kind of thing. And I think part of if you understand where that comes from, has anyone talked about theory of mind with autism?
Not sure they have, actually.
Okay, so theory of mind is the idea that that everyone has their own thoughts and feelings and knows different information. And so a lot of kids with autism struggle with that. So they assume that you know everything that they know, and often you might find if you have students who have autism, they'll start telling you a story in the middle and they'll forget to tell you where they were, when it was, what they were doing, that kind of thing. And they start going, blah, 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 and you're like, what are you talking about? So that's because they don't have theory of mind. Okay. And so that's really important as a teacher because often as teachers we expect kids to just do what we want to please us. And so the idea of being able to please the teacher, like even if they wanted to, often kids with autism don't know how to do that. And they might not even understand why that would be important. So a lot of, like, that's one of the things that would make doing piano teaching a great intervention for kids with autism is it's a chance to practice all of those skills. So understanding that if they're going to learn how to do the piano, it might be helpful to listen to the piano teacher occasionally rather than just play on the piano.
Yeah, got it. Well, I was going to ask what you thought about the end goal, I guess, of working with autistic children and music. Is it about that they can play at a concert, or is it about the other things they're learning and really the piano is just a side thing?
Well, I guess both.
Yeah.
So there's some really talented musical kids with autism. There's quite a few people with autism who have perfect pitch, and so music opens up a whole world for them. And particularly some of the kids that I see don't read very well, and so being able to read music gives them self-esteem and all sorts of stuff that music makes sense for them in a way that reading doesn't. So there's that kind of stuff, but it's also the social side of things too. Yeah, definitely.
And building the just trying to build those skills, conversation and taking turns, as you say, just a simple, what we take as very simple things.
Yeah.
But that they can't get so well in a classroom environment necessarily. So one-on-one, we're in a lucky position to have a really big impact, right?
Yeah, and so that's part of what I do when I'm working with kids is I'll be working on those skills so that then hopefully they can generalise that to other settings, like when they go to piano lessons or in the classroom, or in the playground. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned a little bit in the blog post about eye contact. Can you tell us about eye contact?
Yeah, so eye contact, we get a lot of information from looking at people's eyes, and so people with autism often are quite overwhelmed by all of the information that comes at them from people's eyes. And for some people with autism, it's almost painful to look at people's eyes.
Really? I never knew that.
Yeah. So
I just assumed it was an avoidance or I didn't realise there was a point or a reason why.
Yeah. It's information overload. Wow. And so sometimes kids will actually startle if you try to make eye contact. I'm very often trying to make eye contact with them. So I'm watching them, and I might be with them for an hour and finally get eye contact with them after 45 minutes. And sometimes they'll accidentally make eye contact and they kind of, they're looking around and then they kind of go,
really?
And they'll sort of like, and they'll look away again. So, and I've been sitting there smiling at them most of the time.
Yeah.
But it is just too much for them. So there are some kids you can teach to make eye contact, and it's not too aversive for them. And sometimes kids will learn that they're supposed to make eye contact, and they kind of do it like this. And you have to teach them not to do that as well. That they can look away and then they look back at you, but it doesn't come naturally to them, so they have to learn how to do it. So so we do that, but also it's really important to know that often when we're teaching, we assume that if someone's looking at you, then they're listening, but there are lots of kids who can't listen and look at you at the same time. So if you want them to listen to what you're saying, you actually need to let them look away.
And don't assume that they're not concentrating.
Yeah, so often you might think, this kid's not listening because they're looking at the piano or they're looking off to the side, but then you ask them to do something and they just do it.
Right.
So if that works for them, then that's okay. You don't need to insist on eye contact. But if you want to show them something, like if you're trying to make a sound with your mouth, then you might say, look at my mouth, or look at my hands, tell them where you need to look, because they won't necessarily, just because you're moving your hands, they might not know that that's important.
Got it. I definitely found this one of the hardest things to change in my teaching when I've had Asperger's or ASD children, and that's just to realise, because I'm a classroom trained teacher, and the first thing we do is eyes up here, everyone looking. And that is ingrained in me.
Completely switch off.
Yes, exactly. They could be completely zombies in the classroom, but they're looking at me, so I figure it's okay, right?
And sometimes all the effort that they're having to go to look at you means they can't hear a thing that you say.
Yeah.
So it's really important to ask parents about that, whether they can look and listen at the same time, and what they would prefer. So if looking at their teacher is a goal for them, then the parent might want you to try and get eye contact with them. And so then what I would do is use toys to do that. Right. So especially if you have a kid who hardly makes eye contact with you, there might not be a lot of playing the piano going on in the first sessions. You might want
lots of sessions.
Yeah. That often happens.
Yeah.
So often what I'll do is I have all these sensory toys on my coffee table and I let them explore, and I tend to have 2 of things or sometimes 3 of things so that mum can have one as well. So things like this, I don't know if you can see it, it's glowing.
So it's a fan?
It's a fan, yeah.
Handheld,
it's in the shape of a plane.
Yeah.
It's a fan that lights up, and it's got little foam blades, so you can put your fingers in it, and they will.
Yeah.
And you can also like put it up in your hair and in your ears and up your nose, in your mouth, and kids with autism do that as well.
Okay.
So this is probably one of the most popular things. So I have a couple of these on my coffee table. So if kids are playing with that, then I'll get one as well. And then they'll go, oh, you've got one too. And so then they'll be looking at my plane. And then I might have it up near my face. And then they'll go, oh, there's a person there as well. So it's kind of getting them to shift. Yeah, so you follow their interests and then try and connect with them based on both playing with the same thing.
Right. Yeah. Where do you get that particular toy? Do you know where you got that? Or what it's called?
This one's actually really hard to find, unfortunately. I got it from Officeworks in the beginning, and then I've been able to get other ones, but not the transport ones. Transport is a winner every time with kids with autism.
The fact that it looks like a plane.
Oh, yes, yes. So I have some with planes and some with helicopters.
Right, okay.
But yeah, so I've got those from Walmart in America.
Right, okay. Well, we've got a big audience in America, so
okay. Well, if you go to Walmart, they're often at the checkout. So I bought like 10 of them when I happened to be in Hawaii. And but in Australia, Big W has fans like this, but they'll have Spider-Man and Frozen and things on them.
Okay, yeah. Well, that's great to know. We might put some links in the show notes. Anything that
spins and lights up is good.
Great. That's a great tip. Thank you.
Yeah, that's okay.
Did you have did you want to mention any other toys that you use that you can find make a great connection?
Yes. So this one, well, let me tip it up the right way. I don't know if you can see. So this one is an oil drip timer.
Okay. So it's like kind of like a lava lamp, but oil's dripping down through a maze almost, it looks like, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and so it's the sort of thing that especially if you have kids who are getting really stressed out, then this is the sort of thing that they'll just get really mesmerised watching it. And when it runs out, then you just turn it over and it goes again.
Right. Oil drip timer.
Yeah, it's an oil drip timer. So if you go to my website, which is autismunderstanding.com.au, then I have a My Favourite Resources page, and that has a huge list of the sensory toys.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks.
Yeah, so I've tried to find at least 2 places to buy everything.
Great. That's really good.
So other things that you might be interested in. So there's things like this is all about texture. So it's like, you know how a lot of kids are into tags. A lot of kids with autism want to have their tags cut off all the time.
On clothing?
On clothing, yeah, because they're quite sensitive to the touch of it.
Right.
But I was thinking about this in terms of like if you're doing a piece of music, then because you want to try and include the other senses, then you can get them to find a piece of material that feels like the music.
Okay.
And so they can listen to you playing it and then find, I think it's like this rainbow one because it has all these different notes in it, or it's a bit of a bumpy piece of music. So, they might like this one with the bumps on it or whatever.
So that's
then they can try and recreate that same feeling. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think that could work for other students too, to be honest.
Yeah.
I really like that
connection. That kind of idea used in reading recovery as well. So getting kids to have like a smooth the way that they're reading rather than it being bumpy, that kind of thing. So they'll have a kind of a rough texture and then a smooth one, and they'll say, let's try and make it smooth this time, that kind of idea.
Yeah. So what on earth do you call that thing that you're holding?
So I picked this up at an autism conference. It's called Calming Moments. And it'll be on my website as well. Okay. But there's lots of these kinds of things.
So this is for those listening and not watching, it's a tactile cloth-based product with lots of tags of different colours and feelings.
And they're all the materials, different textures.
What a great idea.
Yeah, so they can find something that makes sense to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then the other things I was thinking of, if I show you some of the things that I use for kids who have trouble with reading and handwriting, because you might need the same kinds of things for playing the piano.
Definitely.
Yeah. So these are jumping frogs. Have you seen those before?
No, I haven't.
No? So they're I'll just pop them on here for a sec. So you push down
Oh.
And
when that flew a long way.
It does. It jumps quite a long way, and you can make them jump over each other, and they come in a bucket, so you can try and aim them into the bucket, and you have races on the floor and that kind of stuff. So
I want to play with it.
Yeah. Yeah, coming to my office is fun.
Yeah.
So something like this frog, that's all about building up this curvature on your finger.
Yeah.
So you probably want that for on the piano rather than a lot of kids will do this.
Yeah. All piano teachers will know this issue. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's often a problem with handwriting as well. So you might have, for kids who, if their parents are saying that they have trouble with handwriting, often that has to do with ligament laxity. So occupational therapists can help with this as well. But so what you're trying to do is get them to push down with their finger curved like this to make them jump. Yeah. And you tell them it's not going to work if they do that.
Right.
Because you can't get the same kind of power. So my son, who has problems with handwriting, when he first started to do it, he was trying to hold his finger still to make it do that because he didn't have the control. And you might notice too, like the kids who have handwriting difficulties and don't have that control in their fingers, they'll often have long fingers.
Yes.
Yeah,
I have noticed that.
So my son who has dysgraphia, so the handwriting issues, we used to joke that he was going to be a piano player when he was a baby because he had quite long fingers.
Right.
But actually that's not a good sign.
No, not necessarily.
No. So so what happens is your ligaments grow, your bones in your fingers grow until your ligaments stop them from growing. So if you have loose ligaments, then you'll end up with longer bones in your fingers. And so,
how interesting. I never knew that either. I'm learning so much today.
Good. So the ligament laxity is a problem if you're trying to do handwriting or piano or those kinds of things because it means that you're not getting as much feedback in your fingertips, which would be important.
Absolutely.
And so what happens is then if you're trying to hold a pencil or a pen, then, you want to have that curve. Yep. And so if you're not getting the feedback in your fingers, then you have to hold on really tight. And
that's when the last joint tends to bend backwards.
Yeah. So you'll tend to get that kind of thing happening.
Yeah.
The pencil. But also you're just generally holding on really tight and your hand gets really tired really quickly and you tend to have pain in your fingers. It's a mess. So, so you can use the frogs for that. You can also use stress balls. So this is a stress TARDIS.
So this looks like the Doctor Who TARDIS.
It's a Doctor Who TARDIS.
And it's made of that squashy foam stuff.
It's the squashy stuff.
Yeah. Right.
So you can definitely use that if you want to build up kids' strength in their hands. Like that can be really good for handwriting and piano playing, I imagine. But there's a better stress ball. So this one is a bit cold at the moment, so it's a bit hard to get my fingers into it.
So this is really hard foam.
So it's not foam at all. It's actually got clay. It's kind of rubbery on the outside and then it's got clay in the middle.
Okay.
And so it really resists you. So if you try and dig your fingers into it, then you can see that I've kind of made a divot. So this is really good for grip strength.
Wow.
And so that'll build up their muscles in their fingers as well. So you can use this kind of thing. So what you're looking for is a stress ball that has clay in it. So I've
never seen that before.
Yeah. Most of them have the foam and that'll be helpful a bit, but a lot of them don't fight very much. So you want something that's really going to fight back. So that's listed on my website as well. And other things that you might get parents to get the kids to play with are things like water guns so that they're doing that grip strength.
Right.
Or giving them a spray bottle and getting them to paint the fence with water. That kind of idea. So getting that strength that way.
Yeah, right. So I didn't realise that that finger strength can be quite an issue for these students.
Yeah. So a lot of kids who have learning difficulties often have trouble with their fingers.
Right.
Yeah. And kids with autism often have trouble. They're not all of them, but a lot of them would.
Right.
So that's something you might want to check for. Yeah.
All right, let's change tack for a bit.
No worries.
You in the blog post again, you mentioned that it's sometimes necessary to be quite direct with students.
Yes.
And as piano teachers, we're very good at being calm and supportive and everything, but maybe that's not always the right thing to do. Can you give us some examples?
Yeah. So you're probably used to being quite chatty and conversational with kids, and that would work really well with most kids. Saying, "Oh, isn't it a lovely day? And what did you do on the weekend? And it's school holidays. What are your plans?" And all that kind of thing. With kids with autism, often that's just increasing the load of language processing they have to do, and so they're already having to work really hard before you even get near a piano. And so they might get quite tired and grumpy with you if you're asking them lots of questions. And then the other thing, so what you would want to do is sort of cut that out, which seems really abrupt, like that you would just say, sit down, and then wait for them to sit down, and then you would tell them what you want to do, that kind of thing, and just keeping it to kind of instructions and not doing the chit-chat. So when I worked at a school for kids with autism, that was the thing that I noticed the most. All the new teachers who came, they were doing so much talking, and we would videotape them and get them to see how much chatting they were doing, and then get them to watch someone who'd been working in the school for a while and see what they would do. So they would often just give an instruction and then they'd wait, and then they might just say a key word rather than chat, or keeping on repeating the instruction over and over.
We all, the piano music teachers all talk too much. We all know it. We all know we shouldn't, but we all do it. Yeah. But I think we're particularly bad because, maybe it's just me, but I've got a great relationship with my students, and it's just easy to chat, and they know it too. Some of them will be like, okay, I'm gonna keep Tim chatting because I'm not gonna have to do what I need to do.
I see that all the time with my son. So he's very, very verbal, and he's not on the spectrum, but has dyslexia and stuff. And so he has maths tutoring because he has maths disorder as well, and he constantly is trying to derail the situation. Because the more chatting he does with the tutor, the less maths he has to do. So kids will work that out pretty quick as well.
Now, what about rewards? Are they helpful for autistic children?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what kind of things work? Well, sure they do. Yeah. What kind of things can work as a good reward system?
Okay, so one of the things I was thinking about, if you have kids who are wanting to do basically free play on the piano, because the piano is a sensory toy itself, and they can, I think the problem that you might have trying to teach them to play the piano is that they might think they already know how to play the piano because they can strike it and get notes out of it. And so what you're trying to do is teach them a more controlled way of doing that, and making it sound like music and all that stuff. And so they might be like, oh no, just get out of my face, I'll just play the piano. Whereas so you could call that free play, and so I would have that as a reward at the end. So they need to get all their jobs done first, so they have to, do their scales and practice pieces or whatever you're working on, and then at the end you might give them a minute or two of free play. So I have a picture of that.
Yeah, sure.
So this is another one of those visuals. So this one I was thinking you might have, I'm just guessing, things like scales. So to me, the scales is like a rainbow, like going up the notes and then coming back down again. And so you would want to make sure that you can hear all the colours in the rainbow.
Nice visual. I like it.
So
I'm impressed, Lydia. You're not, and you're not a piano teacher, and you're making some great connections here.
That's great.
You're giving us great ideas.
I did have some piano lessons a long time ago when I was in year 11, and failed it miserably, probably because I didn't practice at all.
Right.
My son's. Well, at least I have that understanding of what it could have been.
Sure. So again, you're saying these could be cards that are on the piano.
Yeah. So you might have a little strip, and you might pick out the ones that you want to use today. That kind of idea. Yeah, so you can just have a strip of the Velcro, and then have the pictures with a bit of Velcro on the back, and then stick them on in the order that you want them. And so if we've got scales, and then we might have the saints go marching. So we've got a picture of a little saint person with wings and some marching boots. And
very creative, Lydia.
This is the joy of working with kids with autism.
It's great.
It hasn't really helped my artistic ability at all, but
I think
I
you've done
just
very
pretend I can do these things. And then I remember when I was doing the piano, we had this piece of music called climbing, where you had to cross your hands over and go all the way up the piano. So you might have a ladder, so you have to put your hand over hand when you're going up the ladder to remind kids to do that. And then there might be something in their book, so they might do some theory, and then we've got free play at the end. So they can see the free plays coming, but we have to do these things to get there. Does that make sense?
It does,
yeah. And then what you could do is, if you wanted to, you could use that for the lesson plan, and then you could put it in their book, and you could use it to remind them of the homework that they need to do. So if they get all their homework done, then they can have free play at the end as well.
It's great.
Yeah, and you can put little notes in there about what they have to remember or whatever. But that's probably going to work better for them to remember what they're supposed to do than just a list of words about what they have to do.
A number of the other guests said that a visual representation of the structure of a lesson can be a fantastic thing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I guess the other thing that we were talking about with kids being quite literal, so often we'll think that it's not polite to tell kids to stop talking. It's absolutely essential to tell kids to stop talking if they have autism.
Okay.
Because they're not going to read body language. So often with typically developing kids, you'll say, okay. Or you might look at their watch, your watch, or you might sigh if somebody is talking too much. Kid with autism has no idea why you're doing that.
Right.
They don't know it has anything to do with them. Even if they notice, they're not going to necessarily mean that means they have to stop talking. And so they might actually think that you're getting bored. And so then they'll tell you another really cool thing about their interest, to get you interested again.
Yep.
So it might actually increase the talking if you do that. So you need to say, stop talking now.
Like that. Would you mind not just stop
listen
talking?
To how many words you're using.
Yeah.
So would you mind, it would be great if you could, don't need it. You just want to say, stop talking.
Right.
Which
seems really abrupt to us.
Seems really rude. Yeah. But actually, kids will appreciate you being clear with them, because then they're not having to do all that work to work out, so what does he want again? Because if you say all that, would you mind, the lesson's getting late and I think, your mum wants us to actually get on with things. They have no idea what you're talking about. So you just need to say stop talking. And then I would say things like, if you want them to, you might say things like, talking is finished, we're doing scales, something like that. So you're telling them what they are going to do.
Yep.
Yeah. So it always works better if you tell them what you want them to do rather than what you don't want them to do.
Okay.
Because if you say no banging on the piano, then they've just heard the word banging and they go, yeah, banging, so they'll just keep going. They might miss that no, which is important,
Absolutely.
Particularly if it's no hitting, that kind of thing. You don't want them to miss the no in that. Yeah.
And one other thing you mentioned was don't give instructions as questions.
Oh, no. Would you like to come and sit down at the piano? No.
Sit down at the piano.
I want them to sit down at the piano. And then you just wait. And then you might say, sit down.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Great tips, Lydia. I know that the listeners are going to find this really, really useful. So look, we're getting close to starting to wrap up. Just a couple more questions for you. What about group teaching? So managing ASD students in a group context. Have you got any? Maybe it's something that should be avoided. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Kind of depends on what the goal is. So I guess if the goal is to get them really good at the piano, then you might want to have them one-on-one, possibly, because they might progress at a different rate than the other kids. But if the goal is around them being able to follow a group and take turns and listen to others and make a friend, that kind of stuff, then a group thing might be great. So then you can still use the structure. So you could still have this kind of lesson plan, but use it for everyone. Because the thing is, you might also have a kid with ADHD who's missed instructions. The visuals are going to help them. You might have kids who are anxious and they would like to see what's going to happen next. You can have the kid who's too busy talking to their friend and miss the instructions. So it's not going to hurt anyone really to have that kind of stuff. And then if you just happen to be, and you might have like even the list of rules about how we do our class or whatever, you might, happen to be tapping that more for one child than others, but it's for everyone. So then they're not getting singled out.
So I think that's what I'm picking up from you is if the goal is to give the student an experience in a group and build those social skills, then whatever you do it all for the whole class.
Yeah.
And don't make it clear that you're doing something for that student.
Yeah, I think that's often the mistake that teachers can make, is that they think, okay, I've got my lesson plan and then I need to have a whole nother lesson plan for my child with autism in the class. And so rather than doing that, because that's twice as much work, you want to think about how can I make the lesson plan for the whole class more visual? How can I get them to do some movements so that, we're not sitting the whole time and that kind of thing. And the rest of the class is going to enjoy that as well. So, yeah.
And my last question is in regard to special needs more generally. We've focused on autism today, and as I say, a lot of the guests that's been their experience. What about our students with Down syndrome, intellectual disabilities, ADD? Are the themes that we've been talking about, are they things that you can try with all those different types of students? And do you think they would have a good effect on the whole?
Yeah. So I see kids with Down syndrome and cerebral palsy and ADHD and lots of other things, lots of genetic disorders and all that kind of stuff. And there's nothing. So visuals don't work very well for visually impaired kids, obviously. But other than that, they tend to work really well. So
and the same with toys too.
Oh yes, most kids like toys.
I want to play with those toys.
Yeah. And I was thinking too, like if you had a kid who every time they got on the piano, they just wanted to do their own thing, and you wanted to teach them how to copy you, then you might want to use something that doesn't actually make any sound. I know that seems strange for a music class, but I was thinking like I have these little pirates, and so you might have a little pirate choir of
this is like the Russian dolls.
Yeah, like the little Russian dolls. Yeah. So if you did, like each of the little people, they might make their own sound, or they might say walk the plank, or I don't know, R or something. Yeah. And so then what happens is then the kid would need to learn from you, like you might do a call and response kind of thing. So you would make the pirates do something and then they would need to copy you. So they can't just bang on the pirates to make noise because they're not actually a musical instrument themselves. So they do need to pay attention to you to find out how they work. And then if being pirates, you're the pirate captain. So if they decide that they're going to play the pirates some other way, then you say, no, I'm the captain. You're the first mate. You have to do what the captain says. And so you get them to do it that way. And because it's pirates, then, that would be fun. So once they get used to copying you, then you can get them to copy you on the piano.
Right. So that's a little bit about making connections with stories.
Yeah. And sort of finding things that the kids are interested in. Yeah. So like if you have someone who's obsessed with Ben 10, then he has some friends, and so you can say, well, if Ben 10 was learning the piano, I'll bet he would do blah blah blah. And so then it's Ben 10 related, and then they're more likely to pay attention.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Lydia, it's been awesome speaking to you. Thank you so much for giving your time and advice so freely. You're the absolute expert here. Is there anything that I've forgotten to ask you that we've missed?
I don't think so.
No. Any more toys to show? No, it's all right.
I do have one more.
Okay, go on.
So
one more.
This one, it's another one of those ones for fingers. So this is called Tricky Fingers.
Okay.
So it's got little balls inside. This was designed by an OT, an occupational therapist.
Right.
And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to make the balls match up with the pictures so that you get all these little cards. So you can't move the balls from the top because there's this glass or perspex or something. Yeah. And you can't get the balls out, which is good to know because kids with autism will try. Yeah. What happens is there's these little holes in the back. So
Right.
you're looking down on it, but you have to use your fingers to move the balls around. And so
Clever.
you're actually, this is really good for kids who have trouble with that, getting the feedback on what their fingers are doing. Because like if you talk to OTs, often what they'll do to test for this kind of thing, they'll cover up kids' hands. So they might say, I've got my hands here. They'll have a piece of paper like that, so I can't see my hands.
Right.
And then they'll do a thumbs up or something like that, and I have to copy it. And kids who have trouble with knowing where their hands are, they can't do that. If they can't, they have to see their hands to be able to do it.
Right.
So, so if you have kids who have that kind of trouble, then something like Tricky Fingers is going to help them to know what their fingers are doing.
And it's called Tricky Fingers.
Tricky Fingers, yeah.
Great.
And it's on the My Favourite Resources page.
Okay. So we'll pop a link to your resources page in the show notes, and just remind everyone, where can they find out more about you?
autismunderstanding.com.au.
Fantastic. And you do a lot of speaking around the place. So
I do. Yeah, I travel around and I run workshops for teachers. So piano teachers are very welcome to come along to my workshops. So I run 2-day practical autism strategies for teachers workshops.
Oh, brilliant. Have you had many independent music teachers at them before?
No, I've had some yoga teachers.
Okay.
But not often. I've had high school, primary school, early childhood, and speeches and OTs and psychologists coming. So
great. Yeah, well, let me know when your next ones are happening, and I'll make sure I let my my viewers know so we can.
Cool. Yeah, I've just finished my round of training around Australia, but I'll be coming back next year. So It's usually in term 2 and term 3.
Great.
So the dates will be on my website as well.
All right. Thank you so much, Lydia. I'll let you go and enjoy the rest of the day. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. See ya.
Bye.
If the idea of a piano teachers community where you get to access the best educational resources, rub shoulders with expert teachers from around the world, and have immediate access to feedback for any of your questions, then InnerCircle membership is for you. The InnerCircle is my private community of piano teachers from across the globe who share a commitment to creating and delivering the most inspiring, modern and progressive learning experiences for their students. Membership is now open, so head to timtopham.com/community to find out more and get involved today. I can't wait to see you on the inside.